So hi, good morning, everyone. My name is Ravi. I'm the co-founder, CEO of Zeeve. And today we are talking about the concept of DAO, decentralized autonomous organizations. So, DAO is something which is one of the most interesting concepts that came out of decentralized ledger technologies. It has been an old concept, but blockchain gave that concept real shape by the whole concept of decentralization. And I won't delve deeper into the whole blockchain concept, but just cover a brief of it so that within the context of decentralized ledger technologies, it's easy to understand the concept of DAO. As we have seen that in the government sector also, or in the enterprise sector, we have seen that decentralization helps bring in a lot of efficiency, reduce frauds and scams within the different set of processes. And we have seen that as the decision making is decentralized, more power is given at the periphery to the people at the periphery. It once improves a lot of efficiency. It also gives more trust to the process. And collusion, most of the frauds happen when in a process certain parties collude with each other. It becomes difficult for collusion to happen when the process is highly decentralized. And then when Ethereum came in 2014 with the whole concept of a Turing complete smart contract platform, Vitalik itself wrote about DAO, and DAO being one of the most interesting concept in terms of decentralized applications. So that's how a bit historical perspective of DAOs. And today, if we see in terms of traction, so DAO started with few investment DAOs, and that's, I think, was the lowest hanging fruit in the DAO space, where people can come together, they can pool in funds, and then based on smart contract, you take a decision how this fund would be deployed. But today, if we see in 2021, starting from 380 million, 5-6 years back to 16 billion. And now, in fact, this year, we are seeing DAO has become a norm, especially for all the large decentralized players, whether it be blockchain protocols, whether it be large DeFi players like Uniswap, etc. Everybody has shaped up their foundation in the form of DAO. So today we'll be covering the concept of decentralization and the DAOs, how DAOs work, some interesting DAO initiatives, different types of DAOs, the advantages and disadvantages, and the existing regulatory landscape, the kind of challenges which are there, or opportunities to make DAOs as more central piece to the organizational structure. So first, talking about decentralization. So as I mentioned, what we understand by decentralization. And if you see, the whole tenet of blockchain is based on decentralization, whether it be trust or transparency, or independence or choice or freedom to be part of a network. All these are core tenets of a blockchain tech. And decentralization, what we mean by decentralization is where everyone, there is no central authority, or the power does not reside with one or few set of people. Like, for example, if you see any blockchain network, starting with Bitcoin, anyone can join the Bitcoin network and start transacting with it. You can create a wallet, you can connect with the network, and you can do the transactions. Whether you talk about Ethereum-like platform and further other smart contract platforms like Polygon, Avalanche, etc. So anyone can, there are decentralized identity, anyone can create an identity and be part of the network. Anyone can participate in writing data to the network in the form of miners or validators. So it gives, what we in the finance, the word financial inclusion. This is something that first time we are seeing has been realized using blockchain technology. The second is the whole ownership, like who own the data or the assets or the value in an ecosystem. When we say decentralization, that means we are again moving that value across different actors where that value should be, rather than concentrating that value at the center. So decentralization improves massive trust. It brings in a lot of trust as well as transparency on the data, and this leads to remove the challenges where just by colluding power or having a central power, whatever corruption or scams or frauds that can happen in a network, and lack of transparency leads to inefficiencies also in a network. Like if you see a classic case, when we were working on a trade finance consortium. In trade finance consortium, what happens is there are multiple parties. There are importers, exporters, then importing bank, exporting bank, intermediary banks. And then there are a lot of other logistic providers on the land, in the sea, and different regulatory agencies like customs, etc. And today what happens is 30 to 35% of cost in a trade finance transaction is attributed to just the documentation. And why this cost is there? Because this documentation is highly concentrated. Every time a document is shared, it needs to be validated by a central authority to ensure that the document has not been tampered with. So these are some of the challenges, big challenges in the with centralized power or any network which is running based on centralized entity. That is where decentralization comes in. It improves governance, it improves efficiency, and at the same time establish a lot of trust and transparency. So key aspects to summarize what I just mentioned. One is decentralization ledger technologies, they enable trustless ecosystem. That means when you are transacting in a network, you do not need to trust the other person. The technology itself will ensure that there is nobody in between who is tampering with the data. So if you see from a blockchain perspective, what happens is one user is sending an asset to another user. Now, in this case, what needs to be ascertained? The identity of the sender and the receiver. The second is that when the data is sent or the asset is sent in the form of data to the receiver, there should not be any tampering, the data in between. So there's a concept of asymmetric cryptography which ensures the identity of the sender, ensuring that there are sufficient balances, there is no double spending, and at the same time ensuring that there's no data tampering. So whatever data has been sent is the data that will be received. So this helps establishing a trustless network where you do not need to actually trust before doing any transaction with another participant. The second is data reconciliation. Now again, in blockchain, all the data which gets into a block of transactions gets stored in an immutable way. And once the data is stored, and before even storing the data, who is going to write which all transactions into the block is also determined by a consensus protocol. And once the data is stored in the ledger, it is immutable. And there is no possibility of tampering that data. So that way, one, there is a near real-time data audit that happens. And second, everyone can trust that data. And third, the data is then synced up across all the nodes in the network. That way, it reduces the risk of any data loss or inaccuracies. So data reconciliation itself is one very powerful piece of a decentralized ledger technology. And then, of course, being decentralization, we reduce the single point of failure. And once the single point of failure is reduced, then, of course, system is not that vulnerable as we have seen with centralized entities. A lot of credit card hacks and different kind of hacks have happened, which are very difficult to simulate in the case of a DLT or a blockchain technology. And then efficiency, of course, is one of the most important aspects, whether it be resource distribution or bringing in, reducing weak processes in between, or reducing the intermediaries who are not playing sufficient role or a value-driven role in the network, reducing all those and bringing overall efficiency. And in addition to that, one of the another feature that has come into play in last 2-3 years have become very common is the whole tokenization of assets. And when we say you tokenized an asset, what blockchain brings in it is the absolute ownership of an asset. So using blockchain, you have an identity, which is again on-chain identity, and then you own an asset. So there's an absolute ownership of an asset, which is completely unknown outside the blockchain world or before the blockchain tech. Because today, if you see any asset that you own, you do not have an absolute ownership. There's always a third party which is ensuring or certifying that you own the asset. In the case of blockchain, the technology itself is ensuring that you are the de facto owner of an asset. And when you transfer that asset to another person, there's an absolute transfer that happens, and the recipient becomes the de facto owner of that asset. So this is something which is completely new. Is not true for any asset which exists today outside the on-chain blockchain networks. So this was just a brief primer on blockchain tech and what are the promise of blockchain and how the technology is enabling the next level of decentralization, trust, and transparency in the networks. And now we'll talk about how decentralized autonomous organizations. If you see an organization structure, then today the organizations are hierarchical, and the decision making is again very hierarchical. Most of the decision making happen at the top, and then decision moves down from top to bottom. So there's a top-down approach how different organizations are created. So starting with joint stock companies to modern day corporations, including INCs, LLCs, limited liability organizations. And now we are talking about decentralized autonomous organizations. And so it's very difficult to understand this if you try to compare a traditional company that we are part of in a form of, because those companies are very complex. There are n number of processes. But if you try to appreciate this in a smaller form, take a smaller concept. For example, let's say there are a group of people who want to come together, pool in some funds for any specific purpose. Now that purpose may be using that fund for any tragedy or any kind of disaster that has happened, or using it to buy, let's say, an IPL team, or using the same amount of funds for any other purpose. So if you see the process, so there are multiple people, they would be contributing funds. That funds will be pooled into one single pool. And then, based on how much one has contributed, they maybe want to have voting power or share in the pool. And then the fund on the pool will be deployed for this set purpose. So in this kind of process, this is again an organization can be set up, and we have seen a lot of non-profit organizations are set up this way, in a traditional way. Now, just imagine this, in form of a DAO. Now, what are the different processes that happen? One, whether each person has got the right set of voting powers or decision powers based on the amount of money that they have contributed. Now, again, based on the kind of decisions, some decisions may not be in proportion to the contribution one has done, but it should be based on the numbers. Some decisions should be based on who has got the highest or maximum skin in the game. That person should have the higher voting rights. And then, once the fund has been pooled, how that fund has been deployed. Are they being deployed as per the vision and objectives of the organization, or is it not? And this is something I think you can clearly corroborate based on, we have seen in a lot of non-profit organizations where the funds are deployed, they are not aligned with the objectives of the organization. And that is where a lot of corruption, etc., comes into picture. This is can be completely transformed into a decentralized autonomous organization, driven by smart contracts, driven by rules. There's a proper governance, and there's a check and balance automatically built into the technology itself. So just to imagine you are solving all those different kind of challenges of different processes within a traditional organization by using a DAO-based organization. So now, what are the key components in designing a decentralized autonomous organization? So one is the smart contracts. Now, what are smart contracts? The smart contracts are, in simple terms, they are basically a set of rules or protocols that you define in the code itself. And the way you put in transaction data in blockchain. So there is one, transactions. The second is data. So if you see simple blockchains or cryptocurrency based driven blockchains like Bitcoin or Dash or Monero, etc., or Litecoin. Now there was only one use case, that was you know, having an asset and you can trade on the asset, or you can send and receive assets. But when the concept of Ethereum came in, along with the concept of smart contracts came into the blockchain space, in addition to transactional data or transactional assets, we now can have any arbitrary data. So the data related to identity, for example, a person's identity, which includes different kind of claims, whether it be your national identity, your email ID, your phone number, all sort of data. So any arbitrary data, and along with that, the set of rules based with certain triggers can take place or certain decisions can take place. They can be encoded and put into a blockchain and inherit the same property of blockchain, whether it be immutability or automated execution without involvement of an intermediary or third party. That is what are smart contracts. So they are algorithms or business logic that are written, and there are clear set of rules defined in the code, and there are clear triggers based on which something will happen. Taking a very simple example of smart contract. So we did a engagement long time back in the claim management in the insurance space, right? So there is a weather-based claim settlement concept. So there is an insurance product, which is a parametric insurance product. By parametric, I mean something which is parameterized. Based on data, a decision can be taken. So weather-based crop insurance is one such insurance product, where what happens is, let's say you talk about a farm or a region where there are multiple agricultural land, and there are multiple farmers who are using those lands to grow crops. Now, there may be different weather conditions based on which the crops can be destroyed. So you have, the farmers take an insurance, which is that if the weather conditions are adverse, and due to which there's a propensity or there's a chance that the crops will be destroyed, or there will not be optimum yield on the crops, that at point of time, the insurance company will pay a claim to the farmers. And how that happens is, let's say in the policy, it is very clearly defined that if the rainfall is, let's say, less than 5 mm for more than 1 month, or let's say there is a humidity more than 80% for consecutive 20 days. So these are all different kind of objective criteria which are defined, which are detrimental to a specific crop. Now, these all criteria, so today what happens in the traditional way, these policies are given to the farmers, and then now it's very difficult. You can understand the complexity of these data sets. It's very difficult for a farmer to know when the policy, when the claim is due. So it's difficult for farmer to know, and then, that gives rise to a lot of challenges. And this kind of concept has got a huge social impact because most of these insurance policies are subsidized by the government. So we created a smart contract where you put in all the policy criteria. Like, take an example, rainfall, and you say that, okay, the rainfall is less than 5 mm for consecutive 20 days. Now there are IoT devices, there are a lot of IoT organizations who put in IoT devices in these regions, and they collect data of rainfall data, and then automatically using a decentralized oracle, this data is picked up into a smart contract. And if the conditions are met, if the rainfall is less than a certain defined parameter for a consecutive number of days, automatically claim will be issued to the farmer. In this case, there's no separate process of applying for the claim, first knowing when the claim is due, second applying for it, and then getting claim, cutting down the whole set of process just by using a smart contract which all the parties in the network can trust. So that is what demonstrating what a smart contract is with an example. And so smart contracts is one of the, and the second is a flattened hierarchy. A flattened hierarchy means that, everyone who is part of the network, there are certain set of powers or rights or decision making that may be proportional to the skin in the game. So somebody who has put in more tokens or more funds into the pool may have some disproportionate rights in proportion to the funds they have put in. But then apart from that, there are a lot of decisions that are based on number of votes. So everyone is pretty much equal. So there's a complete flattened hierarchy, and it's more value driven. Who plays more value? Not just in terms of how many tokens that they own, but value in other means also. If it's a tech organization who writes, like, the value may be writing maximum lines of code, or sales, converting sales. So based on who is bringing more value, can derive more value out of the network. And then the decisions are community driven. So if you see, like a classic example is, for example, Parity Foundation, which runs the whole Polkadot ecosystem. Now there, all the grants and etc. are done based on community voting. Polygon also started that in their grants. Whenever Polygon was giving a grant, you put in your grant proposal. The community who own Polygon tokens will be, or Polkadot or dots, will be voting on those proposals, and based on that, decision will be taken. So a lot of community-driven decisions. Yes, we are today still at the early times of DAOs. It's going to take a lot of time, but yes, this is theoretically, all the decisions pretty much can be done using the power of the community, or the rights which have been given to the community. So these are three major components of a DAO. You use smart contracts to automate things. It's community driven, so everyone has got a voting rights, voting power. A lot of decisions are done based on that. And there's the flattened hierarchy, and anybody can, in most of the cases, anyone can join the network. Different kind of DAOs. So I started with the grants or investment pools, investment DAOs or grant DAOs. They are very easy to understand, simpler DAOs, comparatively simpler smart contracts. But as we move further and we talk about a larger organization with a lot of decision making, and how some of those decisions can be done using power of the community or the participants, of course, the set of smart contracts will become more and more complex. But starting with some of the initial DAOs, there are quite a few DAOs now. In fact, BitDAO, who has launched a protocol recently called Metal. So there are a lot of different kind of autonomous organizations which are now structured in the form of a DAO. So we have protocol DAOs, like you have seen Uniswap, and very interesting Uniswap DAO. So when Uniswap came up with a version V3, at that point of time, like normally what happens is, any of these DeFi players, every code is open source, is available to the community as soon as that code is put into the GitHub repo. But when Uniswap launched the version V3 of Uniswap, at that time, the community of the DAO community of Uniswap, they decided to keep the source closed for a certain period of time and open it only after, let's say, 6 months or 1 year. And then, deciding on how much, if you want to, let's say, change the amount of interest the platform charges, or the fee that the platform charges, all these decisions are done based on the participation from the community who owns the tokens of the foundation. And then, there are service DAOs being used in a lot of, guild players, guild platforms. They use service DAOs. And then there are social DAOs, is something which are very hot right now. Social DAOs and DAOs in the media space, and a lot of whether it be learn to earn kind of concepts are being structured as a DAO. So a lot of these initiatives are now coming in, and the whole idea is that how to give trust to the community. So let's say there's a learn to earn DAO, and the concept of play to earn, learn to earn, these kind of concepts, the central pieces, and we have seen this in traditional centralized organization. What happens is, somebody start an initiative, says that you do such an activity and you will be paid a certain amount. Now we know that these kind of organizations, a lot of MLM frauds has happened because of this structure, because the problem was that all the power resided in the central player, and they used to give rewards for a certain period of time, but then suddenly when the overall size of the network increases, they accumulate a lot of wealth and value, and then they run away. So to give a trust to a larger community to participate in a network and make the network larger and larger, there should be distribution of power in the form of decentralization. Then only the community would be able to participate in, and that is how these networks will grow over a period of time. So there, this whole concept of DAOs it becomes very important. So you see a lot of these, in fact, most of these play to earn and learn to earn kind of concepts are now adhering to the DAO concept, where everything is coded into smart contract. So take another example of Rarible, where you are incentivizing, and incentivization is core to the blockchain-based systems. So Rarible had a smart contract-driven process of incentivization to all the users who are early adopters of the platform. So all these concepts, when done in a form of a DAO, using proper smart contracts, using proper governance rules, become easy to appreciate, and people trust it more, and that helps the organizations to even grow. Some of the interesting DAO initiatives, Aave, Uniswap, etc., comes under the DeFi. They are all DeFi ecosystems who have created foundation, and then it is controlled or structured in the form of a DAO, and all the decision making is done by people who are holding the tokens of the foundation. At times, they may have a 2-token, 3-token kind of concept. So one token which is running within the platform as the platform economics, but at the same time, for the foundation, which is sitting on top of the platform, is run by is structured in the form of a DAO and run by all the foundation token holders. And then there are other like At.Dr. Aragon is a platform which is very interesting. Aragon, gives you a lot of tools that if you want to, let's say, start building a DAO. So where to start? If you do it from scratch using different set of contracts, it becomes difficult. So there are platforms like Aragon and others where and a lot of DAO platforms are coming in where you can simply go, you can define your configuration parameters, and you can deploy the contract and start a DAO. Then GitDAO is again a very popular DAO, which is it's a funding based DAO, has got a lot of initiatives, and based on what is defined in their objectives, accordingly the decisions are taken by the DAO. So this was about what the DAOs are and what is the benefit of a DAO, and how increasingly we are going to see DAO becoming a more prominent structure. Now, how to launch a DAO? So as I mentioned, one of the critical pieces is the smart contracts. You need to define the rules of an organization, and then you encode those rules in the form of a smart contract. And then, there is a proper token economics that is defined as part of the DAO, and those tokens are then issued. And then, people are going to subscribe to those tokens, and based on however tokens they hold, they will get a certain set of rights and voting powers that they can use to then, vote on different proposals, how the DAO is going to operate. So whatever may be the function of an organization, then, it requires decisions. So those proposals are done by then all the token holders of the DAO. So it's a very simplistic process, what you see here. As I mentioned, for all simple kind of organization, this process works pretty well. As DAOs are becoming more complex smart contracts will come in. Different kind of proposals will also be segregated with different kind of concepts. So governing a DAO is a complex dynamic process. Of course, a lot of tools are required, and a lot of platforms have built DAO. There are in fact now more than 50 platforms which enable you to launch your DAOs very easily. There are a set of smart contracts, plain vanilla contracts that you can use. Now, let's talk about different set of voting processes. And this is what I meant by when I said that, decision making itself may be a complex process, and more complexity is required in structuring the DAO contracts. So there may be a token based quorum voting, which require a certain number or percentage of tokens to participate. Like, in the case of Uniswap compound. So a decision, it's very simple, like you need to achieve a quorum, and then only the decision will pass. So if you require 60% or 70% voting to happen, so what happens is, and as we have seen in the traditional stock exchanges also, there's voting happens, but most of the people even don't participate in voting, right? So, but there are certain decisions which are very critical and require a majority decision. So you need to have an established quorum. So some decisions may be based on this kind of process. Then there may be a concept of delegation, where a token holder may not be able to find out time, but they can delegate their decision making to someone else. So it may be a third party organized firm, it may be a third party individual that can be given the power to delegate. And then there are councils and communities. Initially, if you see most of the DAO foundations, they start with a council, because there are always going to be certain set of decisions that can be done by councils or different set of committees. Because as we know, certain decisions require not just simply intent of the token holders, but it does require some kind of expertise. So if it's a pure tech decision, you would require expertise of some tech people to ensure that the right decision is being taken. So that's why these councils still become important. So today, the kind of complexity of decisions is there. Not everything can be 100% based on token holders. So that's why the concept of councils still remain and will remain for a longer period of time. Then there's a continuous approval voting. So these are typically used in grants, and it allows new proposals to be submitted, right? And then there's optimistic governance, which assumes that the proposals pass unless there's a strong objection. So it's very simple that you're optimistic that, okay, this is fine. So this is the reverse of where people need to vote based on a quorum. A reverse of it where, it will automatically pass until unless there's an objection to it. So, for example, there are some routine decisions that are being taken, right? Until unless there's a strong objection, somebody feels that there's something fishy, then, this kind of governance is there. We have seen this in the form of, if you see optimistic roll-ups in the layer 2 solutions, there, again, the concept is very much similar. You are optimistic that whatever data has been validated is correct, until unless somebody puts a claim against it. So optimistic governance is pretty much like a similar concept, where a proposal is passed until unless there are some objections. And then quadratic voting, where votes are counted based on their square root, reducing the influence of large token holders. So this is one way. The second way is, of course, so sometimes you say one token, one vote. Sometimes you say that one wallet, one vote. Right? Again, possibilities that somebody may distribute their tokens to multiple wallets, but the idea is that one person, one vote, something like that. But in the case of decentralized piece, you would say one wallet, one vote. So the idea is that some decisions, you do not want it to be influenced by someone who hold a larger number of tokens. Because when these DAO organizations start, most of the time, the DAO treasury holds the largest number of tokens. So if all the decisions are based on the number of tokens you hold, then pretty much, the minority token holders will not be able to vote on or will have a significant impact on any of the voting decisions. So that's why quadratic voting or one person, one vote becomes very important. NFT-based voting is pretty much that, moving one person, one vote model using fungible tokens. And so fungible token is again based on either a wallet or a person. And these different kind of process, they can coexist. And in most of the times they do. Because one organization, when we talk about, there will not be, if it's a simple organization which has got just one or two different kind of decisions that need to be taken over a period of time, then you can have just one or two type of voting process. But when we talk about a larger organization, you will find that pretty much different kind of decisions would require one of these different models. For managing DAO, there is most of the time there would be a platform who starts the DAO. So there's a treasury. So treasury is something that until unless token has been bought by someone, the treasury holds them. So treasury becomes a very important component of managing a DAO. And but treasury means a lot of power within the small community. So there, of course, you require a lot of governance. So there's a concept of decentralized governance that needs to be applied on the treasury, so that somebody does not, meddle with any of the objectives of the treasury. So there's a concept of multi-sig wallets where there may be certain movements of funds from the treasury, for example, or decision based on who the funds will be deployed, what the funds will be deployed for, or whom the funds will be given, etc. may be based on a decision by 3 people or 5 people or 10 people. So you must have seen that in most of the protocols, when they launch a grant program, there is a segregation. So if the grant is, let's say, less than $10,000, pretty much public voting will be sufficient. But if the grant is between 10,000 to 25,000, in addition to public voting, 3 people from the council or the treasury or the committee, specific grant committee, they need to vote on it. And then if the grant is 50,000 to 100,000, there will be 5 people who need to vote on it from the committee, and so on and so forth. So these kind of governance pieces are there. And again, everything is very much encoded into the contract. So it's not that, somebody can be biased and somebody can, when we talk about people, we do favors, and that is where, corruption starts, especially on the ground. So that is what, smart contracts or DAO-based organizations, they try to control, where the rules one encoded into the contract will always operate very same without any bias for everyone. And other areas, I talked about various platforms. So there are various frameworks like Metropolis, then, Gitcoin for contribution and reputation, Aragon, as I mentioned, for writing the DAO contracts, front end and analytics. Gnosis Safe is more on a treasury management or key management. And then there are various content platforms, knowledge management, governance, voting, etc. platforms. So quite a few. This is a very small list, keeps on growing. There's been a lot of traction in the space of DAO in the last 2 years. And DAO, I think, is going to even disrupt. So it is going to disrupt even further as the adoption increases. Now, coming to the last piece, the key issues in DAO, and especially when we talk about regulatory legal challenges. So first, we'll talk about the practical challenges. Practical challenges, I think we have covered very well today. So lower voter engagement. There are a lot of times when people don't participate in voting. So what decisions are based on quorum also needs to be decided. Otherwise, what will happen is you have a DAO, you have a contract, but there is hardly any decision that is being taken. All the decisions are being held up because there's a lower voter engagement. Then, technical risk, because all the decisions are taken by the smart contracts. The smart contract may have vulnerabilities due to which, so those are like the technical risk. And then pseudonymity or accountability issues, information asymmetry and potential misuse. It's very similar to insider trading or these kind of challenges, because as I mentioned, whenever a DAO starts, it cannot be 100% DAO. The main platform will have a treasury, and treasury will have a disproportionate power to start with. And power concentration again points to that piece. So these were some of the practical challenges, but as DAOs the whole concept will improve, more complex contracts will start coming in. People learn from the mistakes of others, and then slowly and slowly these processes are improving. Now, talking about legal and regulatory challenges. So, does DAO have a legal status? Already, a few organizations, a few governments have given DAO a legal status. Wyoming in US is one of them, and then there are various discussions in Australia, Switzerland, few other, and then since as few governments have started giving a lot of coming up with digital asset regulations, etc., DAO itself will become regulatory, but not everywhere it has got a legal status. But since DAO, unlike some of the other decentralized concept, is easy to understand, and there's a lot of transparency. So I think we'll start seeing DAOs getting a legal status very soon in more countries. Then taxes and registration. Of course, DAO is dealing with a lot of transactions. Transactions will involve some kind of taxation. There may be some other licensing requirements. It may be some fintech kind of license, or licenses resorting to other kind of departments. So those are some of the challenges which again governments are trying in. There are a lot of organizations who are working with various government departments and officials to draw out different concepts and see how they can be regulated. And talent management, course, onboarding of participants in a DAO is definitely a challenge to understand it, the understand concept and apply it. It's something very new. So anything which is new, there's always a dearth of knowledge, know-how, expertise that again needs to be there. Then securities regulation, the whole concept of equity, traditional equity or securities. So how to classify these DAO tokens, whether they are securities or, and how they map up with the traditional regulations that comes under the securities regulation. So now this slide basically provides some of the pros and cons of the existing legal structures. So if you see corporations, there's a separation of ownership and operation. But there's a centralized governance and equity shareholders requirements. Then the LLC, where there's a limited liability. So there's a lot of flexibility in the structure, and the liability of the founders or the equity holders is limited. So it's not unlimited kind of scenario. Then there are a partnership concept, which is inflexible and inconsistent with the DAO operations, because partnership typically 1 or 2 or 5 or 10 limited parties are there, and but the liability is unlimited in the case of proprietorship and partnership, and that's why people go on limited liability organizations like private limited in India. Then there are foundations. It may be non-profit organizations, NGOs, or Section 25 companies in India, where you can form private or public organizations for non-profit kind of organizations. And then there are association and trust, which again we have seen a lot of societies are formed as a trust or as an association, again maybe for not-profit purpose, but for managing certain pieces. So these are some of the existing legal structures, and there we see that there are a lot of challenges in terms of, one, power concentration is definitely there. Second, decision making is again most of the time central, and that's why there are always a lot of challenges, whether it be process inefficiency or corruption creeping into the organization structure. And then improper decision making is again because they are not they do not get the wisdom of the crowd kind of scenario. So so this is we wanted to cover. I wanted to cover in this DAO webinar. Any questions anyone have? Just a brief about, in a second, Zeeve is a blockchain infrastructure as a service platform, one of the leading player in the world that provide enterprise-grade blockchain infrastructure. So if you are building a DAO or any kind of decentralized application, and you need infrastructure to connect with different blockchains, Zeeve today supports more than 45 blockchains. And we are trusted by 26,000 plus developers and Web3 startups, and 30 plus large enterprises who are using Zeeve platform to manage their blockchain infrastructure. And you can, in the API subscription, we provide a free package which provides you 10 million API hits. And that, till the time you are building an app, launching it, getting the initial set of users to start using your app, you do not need to pay for the infrastructure. It's provided completely free by the Zeeve platform. Now, any questions, anyone I can quickly answer? I think I still have about 5 to 10 minutes. You can use the chat box to put in your questions, and I'll take up those questions here. So if nobody has any question, then feel free to connect with me over the LinkedIn or use our Telegram. Connect with Zeeve on LinkedIn, Telegram, Twitter. And if you have any questions, any help, if you are building in blockchain and you need any kind of assistance, do connect with us, and our team will be very eager to help you. Thanks a lot for attending this webinar, and keep connect with our event channel, which keep you posted on different kind of events, whether it be webinars, in-person meetups, hackathons. So there are a lot of Web3 initiatives we do, starting from learning what blockchain is, to different core concepts, to when you plan to start building. So one question, can we use our own cloud with Zeeve? Yeah, so absolutely, Lalit. I think we are one of the unique players in the world who provide bring your own cloud. But bring your own cloud functionality is limited to certain protocols only. As you can understand, for example, shared APIs, there cannot be a bring your own cloud. So wherever bring your own cloud is applicable, we do provide. And we support 6 plus major cloud providers. So you can simply come on the Zeeve platform, you can authorize your cloud account, and Zeeve will help you deploy your infrastructure within your own cloud environment. Still, Zeeve will help you deploy, manage, monitor everything that you get in a managed cloud, but the actual infrastructure will be running on your cloud account. Yeah, with that, thanks everyone for attending the webinar. Keep smiling, keep building. Thank you.